What if everything you knew about death was wrong? Not the moment of dying, but what happens after. You've heard the tales of shadows, ghosts, eerie creaks, but that surface-level fear, things our minds conjure when we can't comprehend the unknown. True fear lies in understanding that what comes next is worse. It's not a specter in the night. It's the revelation that reality, your very existence, was never what you thought. Imagine waking up one day only to realize you've been asleep your entire life, and death is the first time you truly open your eyes. This story doesn't deal in haunted houses or creepy noises. It uncovers something darker. The thought that perhaps the final destination isn't peace, but an eternal prison within your own mind. When you die, you don't rest. The dream, if it was a dream, was too real. Vincent wasn't scared of death. He'd seen it too many times to be afraid. Working in hospice care, he had watched dozens of people slip away. He knew the signs, the shallow breathing, the growing stillness, the glassy eyes staring at something only they could see. It always struck him as peaceful, and in his line of work, that peace was a comfort. Death, he thought, was the end, the calm after a stormy life. But Vincent had never asked himself what came after. He believed in nothing beyond. The body stopped, the mind shut off, and that was it. It was the only way he could do his job, telling grieving families that their loved ones were in a better place when, in his heart, he believed there was no place at all. That was until Mrs. Carter. She was one of the older patients, a quiet woman with dementia, who spent her days muttering nonsense in her bed. She had been deteriorating for months, but something in her eyes remained sharp, a knowing gaze that seemed to pierce right through Vincent whenever he checked in on her. One day, out of nowhere, she grabbed his wrist with more strength than he thought possible for her frail body. She looked at him, her eyes burning with clarity, and whispered, "When you die, you don't rest. You wake up." Vincent felt a shiver run down his spine. He pulled away, dismissing it as the ravings of a woman trapped in her mind. But those words stuck with him. "You don't rest. You wake up." What did she mean? A few days later, Mrs. Carter passed away. As Vincent prepared her body for transport, he couldn't help but think of her last words. He shrugged it off, going through the motions of his job. But that night, he had a dream that felt more real than any he'd ever experienced. In it, he stood at the foot of an open grave. It was night, and there was no sound, no wind, no rustle of leaves, not even the beat of his own heart. He looked down into the grave, and there was a body, lying motionless in the casket. It was him, but the body wasn't dead. Its eyes snapped open, wide with terror, its mouth moving as if screaming, but no sound came out. Vincent stood there, paralyzed, unable to move, as his other self clawed at the lid of the coffin, fingers scratching until they bled. He couldn't wake up, he couldn't escape, and then he realized he wasn't dreaming. This was real. The thought hit him like a wave. He was already dead, and this was his eternity, watching himself trapped in the ground, screaming into the void. He woke up drenched in sweat, gasping for air. The dream, if it was a dream, was too real. It wasn't the kind of terror that fades in the morning light. It clung to him, making every breath feel like a struggle. Over the next few days, things got worse. He would zone out, find himself staring at nothing for hours, unable to move. Sometimes he swore he could feel the weight of the dirt on his chest, pressing down on him. And in those moments, Mrs. Carter's words echoed in his head. "You don't rest. You wake up." He didn't tell anyone, afraid they'd think he was losing his mind. But the fear gnawed at him. What if she was right? What if, when you die, you don't find peace? What if you're trapped in a dream, unable to wake up, buried alive in your own body? Vincent's dreams continued. Every night, he found himself in the same graveyard, watching himself struggle in the coffin. But the worst part wasn't the screaming or the scratching. It was the silence, the suffocating stillness that filled the air. No matter how much he screamed in his dreams, no sound ever came. It was as if the universe itself had abandoned him, leaving him alone in the cold, dark earth. And then something changed. One night, the dream didn't start with him standing by the grave. This time he was inside the coffin. He could feel the rough wood against his skin, the overwhelming weight of the dirt pressing down. His fingers were raw from clawing at the lid, his throat hoarse from screaming. And then he heard it, a soft, muffled whisper from the other side. It was Mrs. Carter's voice. "You should have listened." Panic surged through him. He banged on the coffin lid, screaming for help, but there was no escape. The realization hit him with a sickening thud. This wasn't a dream. This was his fate. He had been dead for days, maybe weeks, and now he was awake, trapped in his own body, buried alive in a nightmare with no end. Before we continue, drop your stories in the comments below. We'll read them and maybe even feature them in an upcoming video. Want some eerie background music to go with your own spooky tales? Comment Storydiva Music and we'll send it to you for free. We love hearing your creepy creations and helping bring them to life. He could feel himself suffocating, the air growing thinner with each passing second. His vision blurred, and just as he thought he would lose consciousness, the lid of the coffin began to creak open. But it wasn't relief that filled him. No, it was horror, because on the other side, there wasn't sunlight or fresh air or rescue. There was only darkness. A darkness so deep and infinite it swallowed him whole. Vincent woke up again, drenched in sweat. But this time, something was different. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. He reached out, touching the walls, and his hand hit something hardwood. His heart raced as he realized where he was. He wasn't in his bed. He was in the coffin. The terror that gripped him was indescribable. He clawed at the wood, his fingers raw, bloodied, as he screamed for help. But no one could hear him. No one ever would. Because just like Mrs. Carter had said, when you die, you don't rest. You wake up, and you never stop waking up.